So let's discuss this with our panel this week. Alison Rowett of The Herald, the former associate editor of the Daily Mail and in Scotland, John Cooper, and the author and commentator Dr. Jerry Hassan. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Morning.
Alison, first of all, can Derek Mackay stay as an MSP?
No. I think the mood of the Parliament last week was extremely sombre, very reflective, as you would expect it to be. And I thought that caught the mood of the public as well. And I think there was a sense of, a line has been crossed here. And if, he continues as an MSP, what does that say about the Parliament? What does it say about Scotland, its governance, how we are able to put things right when they go wrong? And with no recall mechanism in the Scottish Parliament, there is nothing to stop him staying, but it would look very, very poor.
Yeah, Jerry, that's something I think people find interesting, that there isn't no recall mechanism. The idea of that being that it's up to the electorate to get rid of their MSP rather than, other members of the Parliament. Yeah. But can he stay on?
No, and if you try and stay on, obviously Mark MacDonald, who faced other serious allegations in the SNP and was left the SNP, he remains as an independent MSP until the 2021 elections, but he didn't have the seniority of Derek Mackay. Derek Mackay being finance minister and one of Nicola Sturgeon's key ministers. It's true. It's like there is a thing like the Richard Leonard question here. Most people in Scotland haven't heard of Derek Mackay outside the SNP in the political bubble, and it's the ramifications it has, not just ethically, but on the SNP's style and manner of politics when they face huge challenges, Brexit, 13 years in office, and obviously the up-and-coming Salmond trial. In 13 years in office, when they're so dominant, there are big questions about their record and how they govern Scotland in these obviously stormy weather, not just literally, but in terms of the political challenges coming up.
And John, do you think he should stay? And B, what did you make of how the party handled it and how the opposition responded?
I think unquestionably he has to go. There's no way back, I think, for him. That's the bottom line. And I think in the way that it was handled, it's difficult. I think that lawyers were involved very quickly when the Sun began to go to the government for comment, and that the optics of that are never good. It never looks terribly good. So it's difficult for all the parties involved. The opposition cannot be seen to be crowing, and I think, to be fair, that they've not been doing that. I think the seriousness and as we've heard, the sombre mood, I think, does reflect both the mood in the Parliament and in the country more widely.
But Alison, this was supposed to be the big day for, the SNP. This was their budget, and in some senses it was, supposed to set out the road ahead for the next year's election. So when you look at what they're saying in the budget, if their key issues were child welfare, child well-being, climate change and economic growth for the country, in that sort of discussion, what do you think was significant in that for the SNP?
I don't think they were able to get those messages across at all. There was sort of mood music in the background that, that this was a good thing, but it was blown off course immediately. So their job now is they have to negotiate in public with the opposition to try and get this budget passed, and at the same time as try and sell it with all this else going on as well. So they've got to start talking about, where they are spending money, what the big picture is, because I think that's what people want to know going into the elections next year. Where are you heading? Where are you taking Scotland?
And Jay, in terms of what Murdo Fraser, the Tories finance spokesperson, called the Boris bounce, and you could hear the grinding of teeth from the opposition, the calculation that they're having to do, because we don't have the Westminster budget yet, they're having to second guess what might happen there. They looked at the spending on health, education and police coming out of Westminster, and the fact that, big spending there, the taps are very definitely on in Westminster. So £1 billion coming over the border, how do they finesse that? If there is some kind of financial advantage coming their way in the run-up to the next election out of Westminster?
The SNP are faced with both. It's the perils of success on some level and where that puts you. There's a party 13 years into office on 50% in the polls, with independents at 50% plus. And yet, what are they actually standing for? It used to be the mantra was competence. That only gets you so far anywhere in the world. Voters want more than competence, and clearly, actually, on lots of levels, we don't even have competence now. We have failing public services. It's no use just doing comparisons with the state of the Scottish NHS versus the English NHS. Voters here aren't, what drives them isn't the state of the English NHS, and extra monies now are not going to turn around things towards 2021. The SNP have a problem about how they campaign and govern into 2021. And SNP people I speak to, apart from the fact they are livid at Derek Mackay letting them down, they worry about the fact that their popularity has a kind of New Labour hollowness to them in the latter stages of New Labour, and that they are not loved by lots of people now. They are popular in, as all politics has this element, relationally to the complete weakness and absence of opposition. The fact the Tories are leaderless, the fact the Labour Party is this sad wreck lying at the margins of Scottish politics. But eventually politics doesn't allow vacuums forever, and the laws of political gravity kick in. And when you've got Derek Mackay, you've got the Salmon trial, you've got the presidentialism of Nicola Sturgeon, but she's been boxed in by Brexit and boxed herself in, as in the January 31st announcement. These things eventually matter, and they may matter in the style of 2021 and then subsequently.
So let's be absolutely clear about this. The Alex Salmon trial due to begin next month. Alex Salmon denies all of the charges against him in that. John, if you look at how they get this budget through, though, given that they don't have a majority, so they're going to have to depend on somebody else, always the received wisdom is it will be the Greens. But what about doing some kind of deal with the Tories? That has happened in the past under Anvil Goldie. They do some kind of deal with the Tories, even if it's a Tory abstention. Can they afford that a year out from an election?
It would be hugely problematic for both sides there. But stranger things have happened. I mean, you look at Austrian politics, and there's a strange alliance there between a very right-wing conservative party and the Greens there. And the unusual thing there is that the Greens have been able to get really serious environmental laws passed. There are very serious taxes on short flights, for instance. So stranger things have happened, but I think to be honest, it's unlikely. I think the Tories are licking their lips at the moment. Yeah. I think they are. They see the SNP in real trouble.
If you look actually at the Green agenda, some analysis of the budget suggests lots of carrots, but no sticks to say if we're really serious about climate change, why is there not a more punitive response to travel, for example, or recycling, all of this sort of thing?
It does give the Greens a problem because, as I've said before on this programme, the Greens, it's the watermelon party. They're green on the outside and red inside. They're very left wing. And they've got a problem because so much of the agenda actually isn't all that green. There's a dip in spending on roads and so forth, and a knock-on effect on trains, raising spending. But really it is, as you say, there's lots of carrots and not a lot to force us to change the way that we behave.
Alison, I just wonder if it's worthwhile talking about people and personalities in all of this, because often we take a sort of high-minded view of politics that it's about policies and so on, but actually a lot of the ground effort, I feel like, is about people and how and the public's perceptions of people. And you could say that the SNP's popularity is partly, at least, due to Nicola Sturgeon's popularity. And Derek Mackay himself may not have been widely known outside the political bubble. Who is it, do you think, in the party, and particularly in a new generation of the party, who the public might relate to? Because we do have these people who are sort of safe pairs of hands, if you like, but they are kind of a previous generation. I think that even they would probably accept that, people like John Swinney or Mike Russell.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jerry referred to the presidentialism of the SNP, and I think that's their problem. They've been short of people, the next generation coming through. Derek Mackay, as we know, was that and is now no longer. People are now talking about Kate Forbes, but they're also sort of looking wider. I mean, I've heard people say they need injections of fresh blood, in inverted commas, in the likes of Angus Roberts and maybe Joanna Cherry. People who have, substance to them, who have a public profile, and who may be able to inject some energy into the party. Because looking wider than Kate Forbes, there aren't that many, if any, people that you can say, well, they could step into the job.
Yeah, we should maybe take time just to say, actually, that just on a non-political point of view, what a great job Kate Forbes did at very short notice. When you look at that as a performance, quite a performance. But Jerry, what about these two that Alison's mentioned, Joanna Cherry and Angus Robertson? What both of them, of course, have in common is a Westminster background. Joanna Cherry still an MP, and Angus Robertson, former leader at Westminster. Is there a possible tension there that some of the politicians in Westminster look to Holyrood and say, what's going on there? We're doing well. What's happening out there?
Totally. And I'll also mention too, up-and-coming hopefuls and stars. There's a real paradox here in it, and it's difficult to kind of get the richness of this, is that the SNP is a party with 120,000 members with an absolute vitality of debate going on in the grassroots and debates about independence and strategy and campaigning. And SNP people tell us all the time, that is not mirrored in the SNP official hierarchy. The SNP official hierarchy have sort of, it looks like, and this is what SNP, lots of grassroots people think, have sort of managed the peak down since 2014, 2015, and also seeming to manage the talent at the top to being narrower and narrower and possible. Hence, Derek Mackay. Derek Mackay was not a shoo-in as Nicola Sturgeon's successor. That's something put by the bookies and spun after the scandal to emphasise what is a serious scandal.
Who do you think was?
Well, there was a paucity. That's the whole point. That's what people talk about. There was Derek Mackay, there was Humza, there is Mike Russell, and it's a bit about... Then there's the issue about, is there a caretaker leader if there has to be, a vacancy at some point. And what people say constantly is the SNP since 2014 have failed to have a strategic debate on the nature of independence and how to win convincingly and how to speak to the voters that voted no, the voting voters. And any leadership needs to begin that debate. I mean, it's not an accident that, where's the one place that's not talked about independence since 2014? Strangely, it's SNP annual conference. That's because they've managed it to not let the grassroots in on the subject.
John, just a word on some of the personalities then?
I think the problem is that Nicola Sturgeon, when it comes to talent in the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon is the tip of the ice cube. There's really very little beyond her. And I think the difficulty they now face is the potential of some kind of schism and some kind of split. There always has been that tension between the gradualists and those, the fundamentalists, who want independence now at any cost. And we may see that begin to rise. You may see the party begin to split and perhaps coalesce around someone who's keener to push the independence question now.
What about that business of talent at Westminster? There's a number of MPs, in fact, shed loads of SNP MPs from the 2019 election at Westminster.
I think you're right. I think that if anyone's going to emerge as a possible potential replacement for Nicola Sturgeon, that's where they will come from. Although having said that, I mean, the difficulty again in Westminster for them is they're reduced to a series of fairly puerile stunts. I mean, this is hardly, Charles Stewart Parnell's agitation for Irish Home Rule, which was ultimately successful, wandering in to the lobbies to vote on things that are covered by evil is not really going to cut it. They have to do a bit better than that. They've got to raise their game even down there.
Alison, where do you think all of this goes in the next few weeks? Do you think Nicola Sturgeon, as some of the optics of it, do you think she's going to put her weight behind Kate Forbes and then try and close the waters over this scandal?
That would be the easiest way to go, because they have to get the budget passed, they have to be constructive, they have to speak to people, they're in recess next week, so that gives them a bit of a breathing space. But after that, I would, to use a phrase they won't like, I'd stick to the day job and make sure that people know you're getting on with that.
But presumably, Jerry, this means that Nicola Sturgeon stays on for perhaps longer than might have been anticipated.
It is possible. I mean, it is also true that nationalist parties around the world, one of the raison d'etre is they are different from other political parties because they have a cause, they have something that binds them. And that's both true and not quite true, because eventually they become, if they're in office for a period, like other political parties.
Okay.
And how you defy that, how you get past that, is just a huge, huge challenge 13 years in.
Jerry Hesson, Alison Rowett and John Cooper, thank you all very much indeed for that.